أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين بالقاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ramadan Mubarak and Kareem to all of you. It's an honor to be here with this community again. It's been, a few years, but it's an honor and a privilege for me to be able to share some insights, inshallah, from our ulama on these, the next 30 nights that we'll have together, inshallah ta'ala. So the plan in terms of lecture, like the speeches, the topics, the content, originally, and my preference would be to try to keep a single theme, a single series over 30 nights. You can go a bit more in depth like that, but I think generally people might get tired of the same, no matter how much in depth you can go on a subject, it might be a little tiring. So we decided to break it up into a few different subjects. So for the first few nights, it'll just be a short introduction, right? Just basic points on fasting, on Ramadan, things like that, right? The purpose of it, the different levels as a reminder for all of us. After that, then we'll move on and we'll look at some of the shorter surahs in the 30th juz of the Quran, and we'll try our best, because we only want to, in Ramadan, people don't like long lectures. It's not like they ever like them, but especially in Ramadan after iftar, usually the 20 to 30 minute window, I think, is a good window, right, to try to deliver some information. So within that 20 to 30 minutes, we'll try in our second series, going through some of the shorter surahs, starting from the last surah, 114, Surah Nas, and we'll work our way backwards. So we'll do a few of those surahs. Once we get to the occasions, the various death and birth anniversaries that take place in the month of Ramadan, we'll take a short digression and talk about those personalities, right, those topics that happened. And then towards the end of the month of Ramadan, the last few nights we have together, we're going to shift the topic once again. There'll be probably another 10 nights or so that we'll have. We're going to shift over, and we'll explain at that point, but it'll be about a hadith that describes the 10 characteristics of somebody with an aql, 10 characteristics of somebody with iman, something like that. So, but we get to that, inshallah, we'll shift over there. So, just to begin for tonight. The other request that some individuals had made is, it's good sometimes to discuss some ahkam if possible, in the month of Ramadan, maybe one or two issues per night if we can. So we'll try, at least for tonight, we'll go through one issue that, is a common, I'd say, misconception in a lot of our communities. So we'll go through that, inshallah, as well. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. As a reminder to introduce the month of Ramadan to us. Right? Most of us know that the month of Ramadan, it's been named that because, as according to the famous hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala alihi. He's reported to have said, "Inna sumya Ramadan li'annahu yarmad dhunub." It's named Ramadan because it does yarmad dhunub, right? It burns, it scorches sins in this month. So because of that burning and wiping away of sins that takes place, that's the name that Allah has given to this holy month. So Ramad, right, literally means something that is an intense sort of heat and burning that takes place. So in classical Arabic, the way the Arabs used to use this was whenever the sun's heat, right, in those summer months, whenever they would come down and those rays would put themselves on the rocks there, right, Normally when it's hot in these kind of countries, the sands, the general area gets very hot. But something that absorbs or handles heat like a rock, that gets, that heat is much more intense on it too, right? So if you put your hand on that, just like if you were to walk barefoot outside on the asphalt or something like that, you feel the heat a lot more intensely on your feet. So that was one of the original ways that it was used. Additionally, they would also use ramid in another sense to mean the clouds and the rain that would come at the end of their summers, right? So after that intense heat, after they, for many of them, they wouldn't be able to grow certain crops. When summer would finally go away, those clouds, the rain would start to come down and bring that barakah, bring that rahmah, that mercy, and cause that initial growth of fall and autumn. That they would also call ramid. So it's coming from that same root as well. So it has this meaning of burning and scorching, which has to do with burning and scorching and evaporating of our sins. But it also has to do with this, after that burning, that cleansing, there is this barakah, there's these blessings, there's this mercy that comes with that as well too, which comes more from the root of where these rain clouds come from as well. Now, the one question that comes up, I think every year, and this is something that maybe many of you have probably heard growing up as well. I learned this when I was growing up. Many people say, so one of the benefits or one of the fada'il of Ramadan is that it also happens to be one of Allah's names as well, right? One of Allah's names is Ramadan. So in one of these famous riwayat, it says basically, and I'm paraphrasing here because there's a few of them like this, let's say that because it is a name of Allah, don't just say the word Ramadan, say Shahr Ramadan, say the month of Ramadan, all right? So when I was younger, we would hear these things. Sometimes we'd accidentally just say Ramadan, or I'm fasting in Ramadan, or whatever it was. And sometimes, we'd get yelled at, you can't do that, it's incorrect. Sometimes some people would say, if you do that, there's a kafara, you have to pay something for that. These are things that we grew up with. So for our fiqh issue tonight, I wanted to talk about that very quickly. So there's a few points that our ulama mentioned, and this is something for you to think about. It's definitely something that we've heard of, and there's nothing wrong in saying the month of Ramadan. You can say it like that if you want, that's fine. But the question is it actually haram? Is it makruh? Is it problematic to just say the word Ramadan? Assuming that it's Allah's name and it has to be respected in some other way. Like, what do we do? So those riwayat, the few of them which do say, they mention this thing that no, you can't say just the word Ramadan, you have to say the month of, so it doesn't get confused with the name of Allah. Those few riwayat themselves are a bit da'if, they're a bit weak. That's not the only criteria that we have, but some say, okay, it's not that strong, so we don't have to take it that seriously. But the other point that some ulama mention is that, look, if we look in our other riwayat, two categories. One is when we look at the first point being using the word Ramadan without using the word shahr or ma or something else. Like, okay, if it's actually a problem, if it's something we shouldn't be doing, then definitely the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they wouldn't do it themselves. But in many of our riwayat, just like the one that was mentioned before, they don't use the word month of Ramadan. They don't say Shahr Ramadan. They do in a few riwayat, but not every riwayat. So if it's something that was that strict, was that true, we would have seen across the board in the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt that they said, no, we are always going to use the word month of Ramadan. Let me give you one example of one of these riwayat, even though I just gave one before. And of course, it doesn't want to work. Okay, let's see which one. So the one that Hajj Hasan just mentioned before, Hajj Musa al-Mulavi, right? This one again is from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. لو يعلم العبد ما في رمضان. If an abd, if a servant or a slave of Allah were to understand and fathom what was in Ramadan. Again, in Ramadan, not the month of Ramadan, just the word Ramadan is being used. لَوَدَّ أَن يَكُونَ رَمَضَانُ السَّنَةِ. He would have had this love and this desire and this hope that Ramadan lasts the whole year. Right? So in this very famous one that we've heard probably before too, the word shahr is not being used over there. This is just one simple example. There's many others, right? So that's one class of riwayat. That's another type, the second proof that ulama bring. That, okay, there's no problem in saying just the word Ramadan. Now the third point, which is also related, is okay, but is it actually a name of Allah? Is it one of the asma? whether Asma al-Husna or otherwise. So again, they say, okay, let's look at the riwayat. We can't go to the Quran because the Quran does not have all of the names mentioned, right? So the Quran's not a source to say, well, the name of Allah as Ramadan is not mentioned there, we can't use that. But you can go into the riwayat. In the riwayat, there are a handful of riwayat where the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and because they're longer, I'm not going to go through those, they would enumerate and go through the names of Allah, the Asma. Some of them go through these long lists of various Asma. Some of them go through Asma al-Husna. There's various ones. Even think about Joshan al-Kabir, right? There's no Ramadan mentioned there. So in pretty much every single one of these riwayat that exist about mentioning the names of Allah, Ramadan is not mentioned as a name of Allah. So the 3 points over here then are what? Number one, that, okay, have any of our fuqaha, especially contemporary ones, have they said it's haram? There's some sort of kifara. You cannot say Ramadan, you have to say month. No, you can open up your own Tawdi al-Masail for your marja. Nobody's ever said that, right? So that's not an actual issue. The second is that when you look in the riwayat, as we said, the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam themselves, they are using the word Ramadan by itself. They're not adding shahr every single time. And thirdly, as we just said too, is that in the riwayat which mention the names of Allah, you don't see Ramadan being mentioned there. So, is there a problem in saying Shahr Ramadan or Mahr Ramadan, whatever you want? No, say that. You can say it, it's okay. If you just say the word Ramadan, that's okay too. But to say that it's a name of Allah, it doesn't seem like we have enough evidence for something like that. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, to start off for tonight, what we want to go through for tonight, and it'll possibly carry on for tomorrow as well, because we want to keep tonight a little bit shorter as well, right? So, when we hear in many of the famous riwayats in the teachings of our ulama, they always talk about, we always get reminded every year about the levels of fasting, right? Not every type of fast is the same, right? We always hear that, there's one basic fast where it's just the fast of the stomach, stay away from food and drink during, right, the hours, and that's it. A person during that time, maybe they don't pray, they don't care to, maybe they're doing ghiba, they're lying, they're cheating, they're still doing haram stuff. They don't engage in extra ibadat at all. Like nothing's really changed in their life except that in that small window, they just don't eat and drink or any of the other things that would break your fast. Like, okay. So that's that bare level fiqhi shar'i fast, right? So that's kind of level one. And then we know in riwayat, in the teachings of our ulama, there are other levels that are mentioned too, which inshallah when we get to it, we'll get to it. Where they talk about how individuals, they start to work on either ibadah or they start to keep away from haram, right? The fasting of the tongue and the ears and everything like that, right? So what is it about fasting that, we have this idea and this discussion where we talk about different levels? Why is something Ramadan, even when we think about it ourselves, it's not the same as other types of ibadah, right? Other types of worship don't classify the same as the month of Ramadan. Even, for example, when for certain individuals, where they're unable to pray in certain situations, their prayer does not have to be made up. But for that same individual, right? For example, let's say a pregnant or nursing mother, if she misses in the month of Ramadan, she still has to make it up when she can at some point in her life, right? For other reasons. And there are almost every single situation outside of extreme ones where a person still has to make up their fast, right? The leniency is much more for salah than it is for Sawm, which is strange because every day we've got to pray, but it's only these 29, 30 days out of the year that we're fasting. So why so much more emphasis on this? Another interesting statistic, and this is specifically about Muslims in America. When we think about the level of practicing Muslims in America, there's been studies that have been done by Pew, by Gallup, by Yaqeen Institute. Many of these organizations, they're researching, trying to figure out what is the level of practice. What does a practicing Muslim look like, and what is the percentage within America? And for year after year, unfortunately, the statistics are not great. The statistics are maybe 30, 40-ish% of Muslims actually consider themselves practicing Muslims. So they'll consider themselves Muslims, but they won't practice. That's the majority. So they won't go to a center and be involved in ibadat there. They don't pray. Hijab is probably not there. They don't care about food, whatever it is, right? They just don't practice. That's the majority of Muslims in America, and my assumption would be in all of the Western countries as well too. What's interesting though is that they have done these surveys separately in the month of Ramadan. In Ramadan, when they go out and they re-poll and they do the survey again, same thing, right? American Muslims. That same before, outside of Ramadan, it was only 30 to 40% that was actually practicing. But when it comes to Ramadan, to fasting, it's another wajib, right? Amongst all the other wajibat that we have to do. There, the number of practicing Muslims jumps to 60, 70, sometimes 80%. So what is this? What is going on? What is so powerful about this month where you see people become muttaqi overnight, right? The minute that moon is sighted, then at the very least, they're staying away from food and drink, which we shouldn't underplay that. That's a big deal for somebody to not be practicing 11 months out of the year, and then for this, probably the most difficult ibadah that exists for most people, to say, okay, now I'm going to start practicing. Whether it's cultural, whether it's pressure, whatever it happens to be, they're doing it. And that's a big thing for somebody to have not given up on their own soul, to have not given up on Allah and maintain their connection, right? It's a good thing and we should encourage people who are like that. But what exactly is happening? What's so powerful about this month where you can see people transform like that? Or people who, they never come for a'mal, they don't recite Quran, they don't do anything. But you see that on those nights of Qadr, at least one of those nights of Qadr, they'll show up, right? The rest of the year, they don't care how they dress, but they come in all white, thob, jalabiyah, dishda, shalwar, could be something. They're there for the whole night. They're there reciting. They're doing something. That's a big deal. And some of these people, they don't even take off work the next day either, right? They'll be up the whole night and then they go for work too. So something is different about this month that sets it apart from everything else. And if we were to guess why that's the case, we don't need to guess. We can possibly look at some of the wisdoms behind it. And we can start, of course, first with the way that it's described in the Quran, very clearly. So I'll mention the ayah for just to start off for tonight, and then we'll continue tomorrow. I want to try to end at 8:30 every night. So this is the famous ayah that kind of obligates fasting, right? And this is in Surah Baqarah, ayah 183. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu kutiba alaykum as-siyam kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. All you who have iman, those of you who have faith and iman, fasting has been, and I'm giving you the typical way it's translated, not that it's my favorite way, but inshallah tomorrow night, if Allah gives us tawfiq, we'll try to retranslate some of these things. As many of you know, if we've talked before, I'm not a fan of these very Shakespearean old English translations, but I'm saying it now just to give us the reminder of the translation. Right? So all you who've had iman and belief, fasting has been prescribed upon you or written upon you, just like it has been prescribed and written upon those who came before you. Why? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Because maybe, perhaps, there's some chance that you might engage in taqwa. You might build up your taqwa. And right here, Allah's laying out for us what the whole point of fasting should be. Very simply put, fasting is there. It's for those who have iman. There's a command that's coming down. If you have iman, just like people, it's been written upon them before, go through this, and there's a chance that maybe your taqwa might build from this. You might engage in what's this God awareness, God consciousness, thinking about Allah, being aware and understanding of Him more often. Now we'll, inshallah, starting tomorrow night, break this down a little bit more, piece by piece. We'll try to, of course, wrap it up within the 20, 30 minute timeline that we want to assign. But some points for you to think about as well, right? To maybe just give you some homework as well. If fasting has been prescribed for others before, what is the point of Allah mentioning that? Does it make a difference to you and I if something has been prescribed as a sharia to other groups before? Well, will it matter to you about our fasting in Ramadan if for other tribes that came before that they had to fast as well? Does that make a difference to us? Why does Allah start off by saying, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu? Why call out people who have iman? If this is something for just all Muslims to do, then why not address this as Muslims? Or why don't you say that this is for humankind, right? Ya ayyuhan nas. Why mu'mineen specifically? Why call that out? And then at the end, why is it that there's a possibility that we might get taqwa? I mean, if I'm doing the wajib thing, shouldn't I just get taqwa by default? Like, shouldn't I just get a reward for it? And shouldn't that be taqwa? If I'm keeping away from this, if the riwayat themselves, they say that shaitan, the shayateen, the devils, they're all locked up in the month. So if there's nobody that's whispering to me, if there's no one that's pushing me towards evil, then that by default means I have more taqwa then, right? So why is Allah saying, la'alla, maybe you might get more taqwa? It should be definite here. So those are some questions, inshallah, for you to think about. And then we'll try, if Allah gives us tawfiq, tomorrow night to open it up a little bit more. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ahli baytihi tayyibin at-tahirin.